I'm Chris Stafford, and this is AART, the podcast where we get to know the women behind their art.
If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll show you what I mean. If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll bring you to your knees. If you follow me.
My guest this week is the English contemporary abstract artist Genevieve Leavold, a self-taught painter who draws on her love of Eastern philosophy and organic forms found in nature as foundations for her work. Her intuitive process has developed initially through deep observation of nature and subsequent abstractions of essential qualities of form and colour from the worn, overgrown and overlooked parts of urban spaces where nature has reclaimed parts of the city. Genevieve was born in Frome, Somerset, the fifth of 8 children. Her father, Lawrence Olivia Hatton Brown, was a builder, and Janet was a stay-at-home mother, volunteering her time for costume creation and design at a local theatre. She also fostered a creative childhood that Genevieve nurtured in nature. Upon leaving high school, Genevieve attended the Theatre College for Design. She worked in the local theatre in Frome, attended painting classes at the Central St Martin's School in London, as well as working as a PA in London. It was then that an opportunity to visit Belgrade in Serbia for 6 months, which turned into an 8-year residency, launched her career as an artist. She says that this was the birth of her work, which focused on drawing and the abstract. She soon became commercial, establishing herself in Europe and beyond before returning to the UK in 2022. A full-time artist, Genevieve is currently showing her work in the US and UK. She lives in Frome with her husband James, a business coach, and 2 cats. Genevieve, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be here.
Well, where do I find you today? Because I know you've been on holiday. Are you actually back in the studio? Is this a full-time job for you? You're back to work?
Yes, I am full-time every day in the studio when I'm not traveling for work or pleasure.
What does it look like now for you in a typical day? Do you literally paint 9 till 5 then when you say full-time?
I work in 2 shifts usually, so I work with my own energy levels, and I'm a kind of morning person. So I tend to get up quite early, and then I'll get to the studio for about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And then I'll work till maybe 1, and then come back home and do some admin, and maybe go swimming, because I'm a big fan of wild swimming. And then I go back to the studio around 5 and usually work through till 8. That's a kind of typical day.
So you keep yourself very fit then with your wild swimming?
I mean, I'm not a fast swimmer. There is something, it's more to do with the connection to nature than fitness for me, although fitness is becoming more of an interest as well. But there's something magic about being fully immersed in nature, literally, and the fact that there's dragonflies and creatures all around you, and it's quite amazing.
Well, you're in a beautiful part of the world. Just to contextualise this, you are south of Bath, which is west of London, in a beautiful part of Somerset. So is that easy access then to the river?
It's a quarry that I swim in, which hit a spring, but so it's a spring-fed lake, and it is very near me, and it's really beautiful.
You have to be connected to nature. When did this all come about? Was this always a part of your life?
Yeah. I'm from a really big family, so I'm one of 8 siblings, and finding space in the crowd of people for me was always connected to being in the garden or being with our pets at home. We had like dogs and cats and guinea pigs and rabbits, and because we lived in the country and we had this big garden, and then also just going out in nature. And it was always the place I could find solitude and peace.
So what does that look like to you now when you look back of how that has carved the way you are as an artist and influenced you?
I think it means that I'm quite I'm quite solitary in my practice, and in order to find that rawness in the studio, that kind of vibrational connection, I require a level of silence, and that's inside and outside, and that's kind of why I work in these like shifts in a way, because I know that first thing in the morning I'm most grounded, and then late at night, once the lights shifted again, it feels like I'm more grounded and able to sink into that kind of slow movement, slow thinking.
And you said your studio is not at home, so you have to travel to that space. What does that space look like then in terms of the available light that you have access to? Is it always studio based, or are you outdoors as well?
I've not done any outdoor painting per se. I used to do a lot of outdoor drawing. My studio's got great light. It's kind of in two sections. So I have one area which is very bright, and that's where I do the painting work. So it's got a big window, and it's I'm trying to think whether it's west facing. So it's not like south facing, so I'm not getting the light glaring anywhere. It's got really lovely even light in it. And then another section where I have work that's finished, because otherwise I get overwhelmed by the pieces that are still talking if I'm trying to work on something else. So I tend to move things out of the studio once they're at a point of completion, or if they're at an awkward stage, to allow, because I'm always working on multiple pieces at once because of the layering process in my actual work.
I was wondering about that because, as you said, you do layer. And is this all in oils then, Jen?
Yeah. And I use a lavender medium to thin. It's a spiked lavender oil medium, which thins the paint and actually makes it dry a little quicker so that I can work a bit faster, because otherwise it would take forever with each layer.
And that sounds like it should smell divine as well, does it?
I like it. It's quite intoxicating. It's strong. Like it's a very intense lavender smell, but I think it's lovely.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. With your work, is it entirely commission based now, Jen? Because I know you've got an exhibition coming up in Santa Monica that you're going to shortly. And I'm wondering if that is all commissioned or you do anything, without a commission these days.
Yeah, no, I definitely do mix the two things. Partly because I think I feel like if I'm constantly working to a deadline or a commission basis, there's not so much room for experimentation. So tangentially to perhaps a project where I know I'm creating work, a specific body of work, and I've already kind of had the ideas and the pieces kind of live in my mind already, I've usually got another project that's something a bit more loose. The threads are kind of not quite woven in any way. So I'm usually kind of working on that as well. And sometimes, like at the moment, I've got a few too many of these kind of different threads and projects. And so I get a bit overwhelmed sometimes, which is quite good because then I can do the two shifts thing.
Let's go back to your childhood, because as you said, you're one of a large family. You're the fifth in a large family there. Talk a little bit about your early influences then, where the art came in. Your mother was a creative designer, wasn't she? So did she influence you and steer you in that direction?
Yeah, so Mum was more amateur design, but it was fabric and costume. And it wasn't fully amateur, but she often did unpaid work for theatre. So she was very creative with fabric. And so we always had lots of fabric and costumes, and play was a massive part of my childhood. And obviously having that many siblings, that creative play was constant, because we didn't have a great deal of money. So we didn't have a lot of, I mean, I grew up in the 80s, so, well, you know, the technological age hadn't quite boomed yet, but it was on the verge of it. So most people had TVs and VCRs and things like that, but we didn't, except that my grandmother lived with us and she had a TV upstairs in her room, which we could sneak in and watch occasionally for educational programs. But yeah, I think Mum was a massive influence in terms of just encouraging creativity and allowing us to run wild a bit at home in terms of how the children held the space. I mean, we outnumbered the adults 4-1, so kind of. And I think that, and then also again having so many siblings, like I said before about going out into nature, another way of finding kind of peace and solitude was drawing for me always, and colouring in and pattern construction. Yeah, so it was definitely an early thing. And then also Mum taught religion and philosophy later. And so the influence of all those religious texts, the Bhagavad Gita and the Tao Te Ching and the even Bible stories, but also ancient Egypt and Greek myths. And that always really excited me, this idea of our closeness to nature through mythology.
Did you get a chance to visit any of those places? You know, did your parents take you to museums and galleries and travel overseas?
No, we didn't. We really didn't have much money, so we'd go to the seaside. But I remember when I met my husband, he had travelled a lot, and I think I said to him, and it was probably off the cuff, but then it really stuck with me. I said, I didn't travel, but I travelled a lot in my mind. So that capacity for imaginative play was really present in my family. So I felt like I'd been to these places because, you know, when you read something or you look at a picture and you can take yourself there. Yeah, if that makes sense.
It sounds like you had a curious mind. So you did dig into books.
Oh, yeah.
And is that still the case?
Yes, although I feel I have less time for it now. And I'm trying to make a point of reconnecting with, especially with fiction and with stories, because I feel now that we are living in the technological age, I think it's really easy to get caught up in technology and visual media as a forms of, I don't know, like it's a relaxation, isn't it? But actually I feel like it can cut into that creative curiosity.
Would you have taken those impressions that you got then as a child, Jen, and in your readings and in your curiosity for exploring different cultures, would you have brought that to the drawing books that you had as a child?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I think I did. I know with certain illustrations, the color palettes really, I used to explore, especially the Bhagavad Gita. There were these amazing luminous illustrations in the copy that my mum had. And I do remember copying those. And I think that affected my, and actually, yeah, there was a there was an Egyptian mythology book that I was really fascinated with. And I remember drawing the gods, Anubis, and for when I was at GCSE level, no, not GCSE, younger than that, and being really proud of it and handing it to my teacher. And she just looked a bit confused and said, I don't know how to mark abstract work. And I think I'd say it was surrealist more than abstract, but yeah, that was my first critique of my drawing in education.
Yeah, how about the art teachers that you were learning from? Who were the influences? And you can drop some names as well. They might enjoy a shout out if they think that they were a part of your journey.
Oh, well, I mean, that particular art teacher was called Tamsin Thomas, and she was a wonderful teacher. She taught pottery and ceramics predominantly. So when I first started doing art, because I was always interested in it, but I was always intimidated by it as a subject in a way. I loved doing it, but I think sometimes you get an impression of what good art is supposed to look like from a young age, especially through education. And it's really off-putting if you're at all anxious. And I was quite a shy child. Not shy, typically shy, but a bit, in my own world all the time. So, but she was really lovely, and she tried to encourage me a lot with the three-dimensional work predominantly, which was great. And then I actually went on I did do art A-level as a result of her encouraging me. And then at A-level, I had this amazing teacher called Anne Bull, who she really saw, she was quite fierce, but she really saw that I was a strong draftswoman. And so she encouraged me a lot with drawing and kind of forced me to tighten up my drawing skills and my observation skills a lot, which I was very grateful for. Yeah.
And did they then guide you? Do you think their influences were instrumental in guiding you into, because you went to theatre college to do theatre design, didn't you? That was your first choice.
Yeah. But I think Anne particularly, I mean, when I was at A-levels, I was going through quite a tough time. So I was really failing pretty much every subject. And I hadn't thought art for me was I'd chosen it because I liked it. And I felt like if I was going to be studying, I should be studying something I liked as well as things I thought were appropriate. So I was studying Spanish and psychology were my other two A-levels. And in my head, I was going to become a PA, like an executive PA assistant, and do international travel. And that was kind of what I thought I should be doing because my older sister's friend had done it and it seemed like a good career and a possible career. But I think because Anne was so encouraging about my drawing skills, it really, when I realized everything else was failing, I had the confidence to tell my mum that everything was failing. And she said, well, why don't you just do your art foundation instead of, worrying about the subjects that you're not loving. And so that led me to actually consider creativity as a career. But still, I was very intimidated by art. So I think theatre was something that felt softer and more accessible. And I think because of Mum's costume making, it felt like a world that I kind of understood a bit more. And so I chose that.
What was behind the struggles then? You said you had a hard time as a teenager.
Yeah, it was complications from my dad leaving when I was 12. It was a kind of, I would say, violent end to our family unit. And I think, like a lot of teenagers, the processing of my childhood experiences, the less positive side of my childhood, came out as a teenager because it was my first taste of freedom. I was living a little bit away from home. I wasn't like as connected to the family as I used to be. And so I was a bit of a wild child. And so I would spend a lot of time just not in lessons, basically, in cafes, smoking cigarettes and talking to my friends. Yeah.
I would imagine that nature, going out and getting out into nature alone, would be an escape from the unrest at home for you.
It's an interesting dynamic, which I hadn't considered before, but weirdly, one of the places I would go with my father when I was a kid where the relationship wasn't strained and painful was in nature, like when we take the dogs for a walk, and so perhaps that's contributed. I'd not really considered before, but perhaps that's contributed also to the sense that of like a safe place, because it was like one place where I was safe with him as well. So it's interesting. It's definitely a place where I felt peace and love. Particularly weirdly, a place that I now visit. Now I'm back living in my hometown, and it sparked new work.
So those emotions then are coming to the fore in a way. I mean, a lifetime of emotions and connections to the environment.
Yeah. And I think with art, you're always tapping into something. I feel like there's always layers to it. And of course, I work in layers as well. But I think you're tapping into the surface level of your experience, but then also there's universal experience. And then there's something even more fundamental beneath that is this, energetic exchange that exists in all life. And so it's like, yeah, that experience is happening, I think. And then you're always coming out and bringing these things out to the surface. Yeah, if that makes sense. In the work.
Yes, because your work does emit, the movement, the fluidity, harmony, and there's a rhythm that you create through those layers, and you can see it in your work. So it seems like a building process, and a building process that slowly your mind allows to emerge, and you put it on canvas.
Yes.
And I read that your dance was something that you were interested in when you were younger. I'd imagine that also comes into play too, with the movement and rhythm and so on.
Oh, massively. Yeah, I think my first dream as a child was to be a dancer. And dance is still the other place where I think where I find most freedom. And I'm inspired by dancers. In fact, a lot of the practitioners that I find most inspiring are quite often performance artists or dancers, because there is something about the body in motion that's, I feel like, one of the most pure expressions of that energetic quality that I was talking about. And so, yeah, it's very present in my work. And when I paint, it's quite physical in that way, when it's at its best.
Yes, because when you're working on large canvases, then the whole body is involved, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
What does dance look like to you now, Jen?
Honestly, it looks like being a bit drunk, if that makes sense. Probably the only time I cut loose on the dance floor is after a few drinks, and it is something I'm trying to change. But when it happens, it's quite wild, and luckily not ever been recorded.
Well, I'm glad you can still do it, because I think that's one of the things we do tend to get more distant from as we get older, unfortunately. Even if you enjoy dancing, it's very easy to not dance as much as we maybe would like to or did enjoy.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And, I laugh about only dancing when I'm drunk, but I think it's a bit of a tragedy, because I think it's such a powerful force for good. Yeah.
Let's go back to college. And what happened in college, your theatre design work? Obviously, you thought about dancing, but you chose design. Where did that journey take you? Where did you go to school?
So after my foundation, I went to a very specialised theatre college in Sussex called Northbrook Theatre College, which is a small college, and it's one of the only ones, I think, in the UK outside of London that has its own working theatre space, and which is accessible by the public. So it actually creates productions, and you work. The way that you work within the course is that you're working alongside the acting course and the stage management course and the lighting design course, and you're creating productions from the get-go. So it's really vocational. And then they would bring in visiting tutors from larger places like the Central School and I can't remember the other one. There's another big college in London that specialises in theatre. And so it was great in terms of just it was rigorous, and you were expected to be there, 10 till 5 every single day, which was unusual for British universities and colleges. I don't know if you know, but generally there's, between 9 and 12 hours of lectures, and then it's self-directed learning. And I just think I would have, in the environment of having to manage my own time, I would have just fallen through the cracks. But something about being in a kind of working environment really pushed my, it developed some really good skills in terms of my practice, and recognizing the amount of time it takes to create something of merit, and also working with others, which was amazing. But I was always, scenic painting and the kind of hands-on stuff was where I really, found my most enjoyment.
You took off after college. Tell us about that. And you spent several years in Serbia, in Belgrade.
Yeah, so after college, initially I did a bit of work in theatre locally. So I moved back to Frome very briefly and helped run a youth theatre for a bit, and then did some mask making, and then kind of it's hard to make a living in a creative industry. And I think if you're not in London when you first come out of college, it's really hard. So I found local theatre a bit small, and obviously it didn't pay enough, so I was always working. And then I just left creativity completely for a few years. And then in 2009, 8 or 9, I decided to start painting again. And so I took some classes at Central St Martin's in London, and I was working, and then I also met my husband, and I got a studio, and I was starting to find my way with the paint and also working. And then I realized that if I wanted to really know who I was as a painter, I needed to give myself that mental space, because I'd moved to London and I was working as a PA. Ironically enough, I did do that career that I'd imagined I would do. But the noise of London is so intense. And I just couldn't find the space to really dig into the work that I wanted to find. I knew it was connected still to nature, so it was all connected to the parks in London, and that's when I would go and paint outside or sit outside and draw. And this opportunity to go to Serbia came up, and I'd been out there once and really fell in love with it. I went for a weekend, and there was something about the vibe of the place. It felt slow and just silent to me. And so I went out there for 6 months initially, saved up enough money from my PA job, and then ended up staying 8 years. And that was the real birth of my work as it is now, the language that I have now. I found it, I could find it, and it was brilliant.
What were you doing out there, Jen?
Just painting. And
that's all.
Yeah. I did a small amount of PA work virtually, and then I just moved into painting, and I was lucky to meet a bunch of artists in London, a cooperative called The Tunnel, which I'm still part of. And we had an exhibition in London, which I came back for, and I brought the drawings that I'd been working on, because I started back with drawing when I went to Serbia. And I bought the abstract drawings that I'd been working on, and I sold all of them at the exhibition. And I've suddenly realized that I could do this, and that people wanted it, and maybe I could actually make a living out of it. So I kind of started to be my own PA in terms of thinking about how do you build a business, and as well as making art, how do I support myself financially? And so that was the route I went down.
So did the relative cost of living in Serbia help you then to kickstart your career there?
Yes, it was a lot less expensive living out there than it was in London. And we weren't running a car, and there was a lot of things to do with choosing to live somewhere outside of your own environment that makes you, I think you go inside a bit more. So, and there's less expectation, and there's also there was no internet shopping at the time. So there's certain restrictions placed on how you spend and how you think about money, and how you spend your time as well. And I think these things are all they were really important for my ability to progress as an artist.
Paint us a picture, Jen, of what life was like for an artist then getting started, socially, and what the environment was like there. Was it always in the city, or were you out in the country as well?
No, so that's the thing I did miss, was that I was always in the city. So I was living right in the centre of Belgrade, and it's a very, it's been razed to the ground many, many times. So it's very old, but there's elements of it that are really old cobbled streets, and it's from the Ottoman times. So the buildings are really beautiful. The streets are very old, and we lived right near the fort, which was really old. And then, so I had a studio that I would walk to every day, and the studio space was in a big sort of Austro-Hungarian building. So it's a bit like Vienna, and it had parquet floor, but it was quite dark, and I would go there every day and paint and draw, and then I would take photos of the city, which had lots of bits which were damaged. So another part of my early inspiration was seeing nature in urban environments and nature reclaiming man-made structures. So this idea again of life, I suppose it sounds trite, but life finds a way. So, and the scene was lovely there. The art scene was very, it's very stratified, I think is the right word. So they're traditionalists in terms of they have a rigorous training in technique. And then most artists have to go through this municipal gallery story. So you work with the municipality in their galleries only, but they do support artists with tax relief and things like that if you have had a number of exhibitions. And so I got in touch with the artist in residence there, a woman called Gordana Zičić, who was amazing. She's an artist herself, but she's an avant-garde artist, and she runs the artist in residence, and she's a performance artist as well. So she's on the fringes of all of this and trying to push for a more contemporary approach to creativity and galleries. And so she was a wonderful person to know. And so I did quite a lot of work with her, and we're still very good friends. So it was kind of connecting with her, and we'd have these great conversations and ideas, and we put on shows together, and it just grew my confidence in my work. And I think showing your work's really important as an artist because it takes you out of your own head and into a different space, and you can see the work quite freshly. That makes sense. Trying to make it as a career, the other thing I did, which I think was really key, was I wrote to a number of artists whose work was on a platform called AART, because I was limited by being abroad. I didn't know where to place my work for people to see it in order to sell it. And AART's like a very big platform. And so I looked at people who were doing well on that and wrote to them. All women, no, 3 women artists and 1 man. And they all wrote back. And it was just wonderful, to actually hear from people who were doing it for a living. And they gave me some advice about how often to upload the work and how to, describe your work. And that really helped. I just think it's always about connection. I think growing your career as an artist.
And what about selling your work locally then, Jen? You said you had exhibitions there. How easy or tough was it to get started, get established and get your feet on the ground and really become known as an artist who could sell their work locally?
Well, I think the Serbian, it's quite hard to sell work in Serbia. And I think it's partly to do with this traditional approach to art. So people are very hesitant to actually buy it. It's seen as something that's in museums, and I think that's changing now. But it was mainly the expat community, and it was quite good because it meant that I was introducing expats to Gotz's work, Gordana's work, and so we were building our own kind of art market or art world within Belgrade a bit. But it was quite hard. And then we were kind of getting there with shows, and then COVID hit. So that changed things for everyone in the art world, big and small. And then Instagram was really where everything took off financially and in terms of like my establishment as an artist.
And what about leaving, though? That stay came to an end and you decided to move back to the UK. What brought that about?
It was a mixture of things. I think Gotza was leaving. She wanted to move to Barcelona. I'd had enough of being in a city. And family, I just missed my siblings, and my husband was missing his parents who were older as well. His dad wasn't doing very well health-wise at the time. He's much better now, and I think places run their course I think they just run their course. And it's funny because it feels the decision to move out there was so rapid, but the decision to move home took so long to consider. It's like ending a relationship. But when we did it, it was really final.
Yeah, that must have been tough. Do you go back?
I haven't. I've only been back here just over a year. Sorry, I've got to cough. I've only been back here over a year. And since I've been back in the UK, I feel like my feet haven't, they barely hit the ground. It's been so intense. But I do plan to go back at some point.
Now, your husband, James, you mentioned, he's a business coach. How did you meet?
We met at a fancy dress party in a pub in Brixton in London.
How were you dressed?
I was dressed, it was a cow pun party, which I don't know if that's self-explanatory, but basically there were people dressed as like Hugh Hefner and Mood Honor. And it was because the girl it was an in-joke amongst the friends whose party it was. It was my older brother's friends. And so I went as Moulin Rouge. So I had cow print, like tights and arm coverings and ears, and then feathers and frills everywhere else. And when I arrived, I saw this guy at the bar who was just wearing like a black shirt and trousers and didn't look very dressed up. And he was James, my husband, and I asked him, what was he? And he just rubbed his arms and said, I'm Frisian. Because no one had told him it was a fancy dress party. But he's quite good at, he's quite funny.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned you have a brother who does work in the theatre. He's a scenic carpenter. Yes,
my younger brother is a scenic artist. Well, he's a carpenter, but he does a lot of work with exhibitions and galleries, and also some theatre and TV and stuff. Yeah.
Can he help you stage exhibitions, showings?
He could definitely build me some good plinths.
There we go.
Yeah. And also, I'm staying with him next time I exhibit in London. So,
do you miss the theatre? Do you miss any of that was the start of your career?
Oh, I would love to do a massive backcloth for a show, for a ballet or a dance. I still one day hope to, in fact, it doesn't have to be that far in the distance. I just need to get organised. But I really would love to work with the Tanztheater Wuppertal, which is Pina Bausch's dance theatre in Wuppertal in Germany. In some context, maybe a floor cloth or a scenery. Yeah, I do miss it. I do. There is something lovely about working with people, with multidisciplinary groups in that way.
It seems like the wheels are turning then already, Jen, in that direction.
Yes, they're in my head anyway, turning in that direction.
Yeah. And the exhibition that you have coming up in Santa Monica, tell us about that.
So it's an art fair called the Other Art Fair, and it's quite unique in that it's all independent artists. So when you go, it's not galleries, it's all the artists are there with their work. And so it's a really lovely experience, actually. And I've done it before in London and Chicago, and I did go to LA with them at the beginning of the year, and just enjoyed it so much that I've decided to go back. And so I'm showing a new body of work. Not a massive amount. I generally take 5 to 7 pieces. But there's a series that I'm working on called Unstable Structures. And so I'll be showing some pieces from that collection.
What was the catalyst for that collection then? What's the concept?
It was inspired by a quote by Eckhart Tolle, where he talks about, and also for me, a deeper love of kind of abandoned this concept of nature reclaiming man-made structures. But he talks, obviously, I don't know if you know him, but his work is all about sort of Eastern philosophy in a way, but the kind of energetic self. And he one of his books or something, some talk, he talked about going past a space, going for a walk and seeing a building which was fenced off, and on the side of it was written a sign that said all structures are unstable. And when you just hear something and it just resonates, and it's been resonating with me for years. But now I'm at the place where I'm kind of tapping into it for a body of work. And so the pieces are a bit more fragmented energetically, I think, than previous work. I'm trying to think about this kind of idea of the reveal, maybe the surface being a little bit less whole than in some of my other pieces.
Is music allowed in your studio when you're working?
It is before and after, but not during, if that makes sense. I do use it because I think creatively I find, again, connecting to dance, quite often it's good for me to get in, put some music on, dance around a bit, get my, shake it off, get into the space. But then when I'm actually working, if I have music on, I feel like it influences the work a bit too much. And I don't want that.
What do you like to hear about your work that validates it for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think when people get lost in it, I think that's a massive validation. When somebody says, and I've heard that before, that you can get lost in the work and it takes you somewhere else. And I recently had a lovely message from a collector who I made a commission for. And I'd asked him to send me a photograph of it in situ for, the business stuff. And he wrote back to me and he said, I've been trying to photograph it, but I can't do it justice. It just elevates the space so much, and it's done exactly what I needed. And I love it, but I can't capture it in a photograph. And that was kind of powerful to hear. Yeah.
What would we find on your walls at home?
Oh, I'm quite a collector. So I have paintings by a number of artists that I greatly admire. And a mixture of abstract and figurative, actually. So I have some work by an artist called Michelle Fletcher, who is a botanical abstract painter. Her work is beautiful. It's like looking into the center of a flower or a forest. And I have some work by an artist called Jonah Melvin, who's an abstract but geometric forms with brushwork. And what else have I got? And photographs of my family. I collect quite a lot. So there's an artist called Nick Grindrod, whose work I really love. Again, he's geometric, very much in place. He's from Sheffield, and his work's really inspired by his city and his connection to it. And it's beautiful, elegantly, and his ability to work with colour is magnificent. A lot. But yeah, I collect. So it's mainly original art on my walls.
Are you still a big reader now? Do you find time?
Yeah, I've just reconnected with it, actually. And I've just read 2 books by a writer called Caris Davis, who's a brilliant, beautiful storyteller. And then I've just bought to take with me to LA a Barbara Kingsolver book, 2 Barbara Kingsolver books. Damon Copperhead.
Yes, the new one.
I think it's her latest one. Yeah. And then one called Laguna, which I think I've read already, but I don't have a copy of it anymore.
Do you write? Do you find time to write at all? Or poetry? Is there another artistic outlet in you, Jen?
I used to write bad poetry. I do love writing, but I'm quite dyslexic. My whole family are quite dyslexic. I'm on the lesser end of it, but I do struggle with writing. So articulating myself through words is something I do work on. And I love writing, but I haven't had much time for it. I think making a career out of my main creative passion has taken away a lot of hobbies. But my one other creative outlet is gardening and plants. So I've developed that hobby over the last couple of years.
And would you then take your easel outside, and would there be some plein air painting for you in the future once your garden's established?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Can see you connecting back with nature then eventually.
Yeah, it's definitely happening. It's lovely to be back.
Exciting future. I mean, you must be really, really, really psyched with the future that you have now and how you've built your career and what the future might look like for you.
I am. But I think one of the things about being an artist is you have always got doubt. I think doubt's a massive part of the creative process anyway, because I think it makes better work when you're asking questions of it. So it's like a positive connection with uncertainty, I think, is probably the best way to describe it.
Does that come from pressures then from, say, commissions? Or is that an internal pressure that you're putting on yourself?
I think it's primarily an internal pressure, yeah.
Do you hate deadlines?
I kind of love them because they do push me to be. I think that ties into the theatre thing, because there was no way you could miss opening night. So I kind of find them exciting, but I'm a massive procrastinator and I get intimidated by them. But then I get into it and I'm like full force, all or nothing, I think.
What do you do to procrastinate? For my part, I go around dusting. When I used to write books, I'd go around dusting. And, the house didn't need dusting, but that would be part of my procrastination.
That's like the poem, isn't it? Dust if you must. Yeah. See, I'm the other way. I think dust if you I will sit and daydream. What other things do I do? I'll try on all my clothes. Play with the cats. Investigate other things that I might be interested in, like writing or playing piano, or deep dive into strange areas of interest, like mountaineering. That's how I procrastinate.
Or do you go off wild swimming?
Or I go swimming, but I feel like the swimming can snap me back to work. But yeah, or I'll go in the garden and potter now. But yeah, the cats are quite a big distraction. You can look at them for hours.
Do you ever paint them?
I did paint my old cat.
The one that's blind and doesn't like dogs?
No, she doesn't even like being photographed. I don't know how she knows, but I think trying to get her to sit while I drew her would be very difficult. But I like the idea of it. There's a great cat artist called Eric. I can't remember what his surname is. He does these amazing watercolors of cats. And they're very simple, but they are so feline.
Lots of inspiration surrounding you, Jen, and a very, very exciting time ahead. I think, we'll be following you on social media, on, of course, the beloved Instagram, which is how I found you originally. And I want to wish you the very best of luck with the upcoming exhibition in Santa Monica and so much more to come. So the best of luck, and thank you for being my guest this week.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And to see some of Genevieve's beautiful artwork, follow the link in our show notes to her website and to her social media. And of course, whilst you're on Instagram, please do give us a follow, and you can also leave us a message with any comments, questions for the show, or suggestions for guests. We would love to hear from you. As always, please do find a moment to leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple if that's where you're listening to podcasts. I'll be back next week when my guest will be the rock sculptor Robin Antar. So I hope you'll join me then. In the meanwhile, my thanks again to this week's guest, Genevieve Leavold, and to you for listening.